Billionaire was cold in the airport VIP lounge until his ex-fiancée arrived holding newborn twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The Zurich Airport VIP lounge hummed with the quiet efficiency of wealth. Crystal glasses clinked softly against mahogany tables, and the muted conversations of international business travelers created a sophisticated backdrop to the late afternoon atmosphere. Nathaniel Ward sat in his usual corner, his broad shoulders filling out a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. At 37, he commanded attention without seeking it, his steel gray eyes focused intently on the laptop screen, his strong jawline set with the kind of determination that had built a hotel empire worth billions. His dark hair, perfectly styled despite the long flight from New York, caught the warm light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything about Nathaniel spoke of control, from his 6'2" frame to the way he held his Mont Blanc pen with surgical precision. He was reviewing acquisition reports for his latest property in Switzerland when his phone buzzed. Victor Ward appeared on the screen. Nathaniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Even after all these years, his father's call still carried the weight of expectation and judgment. He answered on the third ring. "Father? Nathaniel, the Geneva deal. I want you to reconsider the terms. The profit margins are too thin for my liking." The familiar coldness in Victor's voice transported Nathaniel back to his childhood, to boarding school dining halls where affection was rationed like wartime supplies. His father had raised him to be a machine, efficient, emotionless, successful. Love was weakness. Trust was liability. "The margins are acceptable," Nathaniel replied, his voice matching his father's Arctic temperature. "The property has strategic value beyond immediate returns." You're starting to sound like—" Victor never finished that sentence, but Nathaniel knew. He was starting to sound like he had feelings, like he had when Elena was in his life. Elena Marsh. Even thinking her name sent an unwelcome warmth through his chest, a sensation he'd spent the last year and 5 months trying to forget. She had been everything his father warned him women would be, except she hadn't wanted his money. She'd wanted something far more dangerous, his heart. The memory of their last conversation still haunted his sleepless nights. Her green eyes, usually bright with laughter, had been filled with tears he'd pretended not to see. Her voice, soft and melodic like honey over warm bread, had trembled when she'd asked him to fight for them, for what they had. Instead, he'd let his father's poison seep into his veins. "It's better this way, Elena. We're from different worlds." Such a coward's excuse. Such a lie. A sharp cry pierced through his thoughts and the lounge's tranquil atmosphere. A baby's wail, persistent and demanding, cut through the soft jazz playing overhead. Nathaniel looked up with mild irritation. The VIP lounge was supposed to be a sanctuary from such disturbances. His gray eyes searched for the source of the noise, ready to signal a staff member to handle the situation. But when his gaze found the reception area near the entrance, his blood turned to ice. Elena stood there, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wisps framing her heart-shaped face. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, looking tired but still breathtakingly beautiful. Her green eyes held the exhaustion he'd never seen before, and her usually perfect posture was slightly slumped under the weight of 2 infant car seats and an oversized diaper bag. But what made Nathaniel's world tilt off its axis were the 2 babies. One was crying, a red-faced, dark-haired infant with tiny fists waving in the air. The other slept peacefully, nestled against Elena's chest in a carrier, with features that made Nathaniel's hands shake. The sleeping baby had his eyes, his strong chin, his dark hair. Elena's gaze swept the lounge and locked onto his. For a moment, time stopped. Her face went pale, and her lips parted in surprise. The crying baby in her arms seemed to sense the tension, wailing louder. Nathaniel stood without conscious thought, his laptop sliding forgotten onto the leather chair. His legs moved of their own accord, carrying him across the lounge with the kind of determination that had conquered boardrooms and broken competitors. "Elena?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, barely above a whisper. She straightened, that familiar spark of defiance flashing in her tired eyes. "Nathaniel." He stared at the babies, his mind racing to process what his heart already knew. The math was simple, terrifying and undeniable. "Are they—" He couldn't finish the question. Elena's chin lifted with quiet dignity, the same strength that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. Yes, she said simply. They're yours. The crying baby chose that moment to quiet, turning curious gray eyes toward the stranger who had stopped breathing entirely. Twin gazes, one sleepy, one alert, both unmistakably carrying Nathaniel Ward's DNA. The sound of his own heartbeat thundered in his ears as one question consumed his mind. How could he have been so blind? And what was he going to do about the family he never knew he had? The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the soft cooing of the baby in Elena's arms. Nathaniel stood frozen, his usual commanding presence reduced to that of a man grappling with a reality that had just shattered his carefully constructed world. Elena shifted the crying infant, a little girl with thick dark lashes, to her other arm with practiced ease. The movement drew Nathaniel's attention to the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of sleepless nights and overwhelming responsibility. How old are they? His voice came out hoarse, foreign to his own ears. 7 months. Elena's answer was crisp, professional, as if she were discussing quarterly reports rather than the children they'd created together. Isabella and Alexander. The names hit him like physical blows. She'd named them, raised them, loved them, all while he'd been building hotels and attending board meetings, completely oblivious to their existence. Elena, don't. She held up her free hand, the gesture sharp and final. Not here. Not now. Alexander stirred in his carrier, opening eyes that were an exact mirror of Nathaniel's. The baby blinked slowly, studying the stranger with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. Isabella had quieted, her tiny fist wrapped around a strand of Elena's hair, but her gaze remained fixed on Nathaniel with curious gray eyes. The lounge around them seemed to fade into background noise. Other travelers moved past them in elegant blurs, their conversations and footsteps muffled by the roar of blood in Nathaniel's ears. "Where are you going?" he managed to ask. "Home." The word carried weight, finality. To Portland. Portland. She'd mentioned it once, years ago, when they'd talked about places they'd rather be than New York. She'd described the coffee shops, the rain, the way the mountains looked on clear mornings. He'd kissed her forehead and promised they'd visit someday. Another broken promise in a relationship full of them. "You live there now?" Elena nodded, adjusting Alexander's carrier with the fluid motion of someone who'd learned to manage 2 infants alone. "I have a small house near my sister's place. Cordelia helps with the twins when I work." Work. The word sparked something protective and guilty in his chest. Elena had been pursuing her master's degree in art therapy when they'd been together, passionate about helping trauma survivors heal through creativity. Now she was a single mother, working to support children he should have been providing for. "What do you do?" The question felt inadequate, but he needed to understand her life, the life he'd inadvertently shaped by walking away. "I run art therapy sessions at a community center, 3 days a week. It's not much, but it's enough." Her chin lifted with that familiar pride, the same defiance that had drawn him to her in the first place. She'd never needed rescuing, which had made his desire to protect her all the more powerful. Isabella began to fuss, her small face scrunching with the promise of another crying fit. Elena bounced gently, murmuring soft words that Nathaniel couldn't quite hear, but recognized as the universal language of maternal comfort. "I should go," Elena said, glancing at the boarding gate displays. "Our flight to Seattle leaves in 40 minutes. "Wait." The word escaped him before he could stop it, raw with desperation. "Please." She paused, her green eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he could give her. "I need to know." He swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. "Were you going to tell me? Ever?" For the first time since she'd seen him, Elena's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, and she looked away, focusing on Alexander's sleeping face. "I tried," she whispered. "I called your office 6 times after I found out. Your assistant kept saying you were unavailable, that you'd call back. You never did." The admission felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Margaret, his longtime assistant, was fiercely protective of his time. She'd have filtered Elena's calls like she did hundreds of others, never knowing their importance. "I wrote you a letter," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "I sent it to your penthouse, your office, even your father's estate. I don't know if you ever saw them." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. His father controlled much of his correspondence, claiming it was necessary for security and privacy. How many of Elena's attempts to reach him had Victor intercepted? Elena, I swear to you I never. It doesn't matter now. She shifted both babies with remarkable efficiency, preparing to leave. What's done is done. But as she turned to walk away, Alexander opened his eyes again, locking onto Nathaniel's face with an expression so serious, so familiar, that it stopped Elena mid-step. The baby reached out one tiny hand, fingers splaying in Nathaniel's direction. Nathaniel found himself stepping closer, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. Alexander's fingers brushed against his outstretched hand, so small and warm, that Nathaniel's breath caught. He looks like you, Elena said softly, her professional mask slipping. They both do. Sometimes Isabella gets this expression when she's thinking, and it's like looking at you in miniature. The observation hit him with unexpected force. These children carried his DNA, his features, pieces of himself he'd never known existed. They were strangers, but they were his strangers. Can I? He stopped, unsure what he was even asking for. Elena studied his face with the careful attention she'd once reserved for her art, looking for truth beneath layers of careful control. I don't know what you want from us, Nathaniel, she said finally, but I won't let you hurt them the way you hurt me. The boarding announcement for Seattle echoed through the lounge, and Elena stepped back, breaking the fragile connection that had formed between Nathaniel and his son. As she walked away, carrying pieces of his heart he'd never known were missing, Nathaniel stood paralyzed by the weight of a choice that would define the rest of his life. Nathaniel's penthouse apartment in Manhattan had never felt more like a mausoleum. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually showcased the city's glittering skyline now seemed to mock him with their cold perfection. He stood in his study, a crystal tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. 48 hours had passed since Zurich. 48 hours of replaying every moment, every word, every heartbreaking detail of Elena's exhausted face and his children's curious eyes. His children. The phrase still felt foreign, impossible, and yet it echoed in his mind like a prayer. The soft chime of his private elevator announced an unwelcome visitor. Only 3 people had access to his penthouse, and he wasn't expecting his housekeeper or his head of security. Victor Ward emerged from the elevator with his usual commanding presence, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. At 65, he moved with the predatory grace of a man who'd spent decades crushing competitors and shaping his son into his own image. You look terrible, Victor observed, settling into the leather chair across from Nathaniel's desk without invitation. His pale blue eyes, so different from Nathaniel's warm gray ones, swept over his son with cool assessment. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly, Margaret mentioned you've been unreachable since Switzerland. Missed 3 board meetings, canceled the Singapore expansion presentation. Victor's fingers drummed against the chair's arm, a gesture Nathaniel recognized as barely contained impatience. What's gotten into you? Nathaniel turned from the window, studying his father's face. How many of Elena's letters had crossed Victor's desk? How many phone calls had he intercepted with the casual ruthlessness that had defined their relationship? I saw Elena. The drumming stopped. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of calculation that Nathaniel had learned to recognize in childhood. I see. And I suppose she's looking for money now that she's burned through whatever savings she had. The casual cruelty in his father's voice hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. She has children. My children. Alleged children. Victor's correction was swift and sharp. Women like her are remarkably creative when it comes to securing their futures. A simple DNA test will clear up any confusion. Nathaniel set down his whiskey with carefully controlled precision. They have my eyes, father. Both of them. Alexander looks exactly like I did as a baby. Genetics can be deceiving. I've seen too many men destroyed by women claiming parentage. Victor leaned back, his posture radiating the kind of authority that had once made Nathaniel crave his approval. Remember what happened to your Uncle Charles? That woman nearly took half his fortune before we proved the child wasn't his. The memory was one Victor had wielded throughout Nathaniel's childhood, a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting women, of allowing emotion to cloud judgment. But now, with the image of Elena's tired face burned into his memory, it felt different, manipulative. Elena never asked for money. When we were together, she refused everything I offered. Of course she did. It's the oldest game in the book. Refuse the small gift to seem noble, then claim the ultimate prize. Victor stood, moving to the bar with the casual entitlement of someone who'd made himself at home in every space he entered. Tell me, did she mention child support? A trust fund perhaps, college expenses? Nathaniel thought back to their conversation in the airport lounge. Elena had looked exhausted, overwhelmed, but not calculating. She'd worked 3 days a week at a community center, lived in a small house near her sister's place. If she'd wanted his money, she'd had 18 months to pursue it. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't need to. Her mere presence was the ask. Victor poured himself a scotch, the crystal decanter catching the light from the city below. Think, Nathaniel. She appears at the exact moment when you're traveling internationally, when your guard is down. She brings these children, conveniently too young for reliable paternity testing, and plays the wounded mother. Each word was designed to plant doubt, to erode the foundation of what Nathaniel had felt in that airport lounge. But the memory of Alexander's tiny fingers brushing against his hand, of Isabella's serious gray eyes studying his face, remained untouchable. I want to see them again. Victor's glass paused halfway to his lips. That would be unwise. They're my children. They're a liability. Victor's voice hardened, taking on the tone that had shaped Nathaniel's childhood. I won't watch you destroy everything we've built for a woman who walked away the moment things became difficult. I'm the one who walked away. The admission tore from Nathaniel's throat like a physical wound. I listened to you, and I let her go, because you were intelligent enough to recognize a trap when you saw one. Victor set down his glass with deliberate precision. She was beneath you, Nathaniel, unsuitable in every way that matters. No family connections, no social standing, no financial contribution to your empire. She made me happy. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and defiant. Victor's expression shifted, revealing something cold and calculating that made Nathaniel's chest tighten. Happiness is a luxury we can't afford. It makes us weak, vulnerable, easily manipulated. Victor moved closer, his presence looming like a storm cloud. Your grandfather built this empire through discipline and sacrifice. I expanded it through focus and determination. And you nearly threw it all away for a woman who gave you feelings. Maybe some things are worth more than money. Nothing is worth more than legacy. Victor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but each word carried the weight of years of conditioning. These alleged children, even if they are yours, will only complicate things. Children divide attention, drain resources, create weaknesses that enemies can exploit. Nathaniel stared at his father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The man who'd raised him to be strong had actually made him afraid. Afraid to love, afraid to trust, afraid to be human. I'm going to Portland. Victor's composure finally cracked, his face darkening with the kind of rage Nathaniel remembered from childhood mistakes and perceived failures. If you pursue this fantasy, you'll do it without the support of this family or this company. I won't watch you repeat your grandfather's mistakes. The threat was clear, delivered with the casual brutality that had shaped Nathaniel's worldview. Choose the empire, or choose them. But as Victor walked toward the elevator, his parting words carried a promise that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. I hope she's worth losing everything for, son, because that's exactly what's going to happen if you can't see past whatever spell she's cast over you. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving Nathaniel alone with the weight of an impossible choice and the growing certainty that his father's definition of everything might be exactly what he needed to lose. The rain in Portland fell differently than in New York. Softer, more persistent, like nature's way of washing the world clean. Nathaniel stood outside a modest 2-story house in the Hawthorne district, his Armani suit drawing curious glances from neighbors walking their dogs and pushing strollers. The house was painted sage green with white trim, small but well-maintained, with a garden that showed Elena's careful attention even in the winter months. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, building the courage to knock. Through the front window, he could see warm light spilling from what looked like a living room. A mobile hung from the ceiling, spinning slowly in the gentle current from a heating vent. Baby toys were scattered across a coffee table, and he caught a glimpse of Elena moving past the window, a baby in her arms. His rental car, a deliberately modest Honda instead of his usual luxury vehicles, sat at the curb like a question mark. He'd flown commercial, used a fake name, paid cash for everything. If Victor wanted to monitor his movements, he'd have to work for it. The front door opened before he could knock. Elena stood there in jeans and an oversized sweater, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with. But there were new lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. I saw you from the window, she said quietly. You've been out there long enough to get soaked. He looked down at his suit, surprised to find it damp despite the umbrella he'd forgotten to use. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. I don't know if I do. Her honesty was like a blade, clean and sharp. But they deserved to know their father. She stepped aside, and he entered a world that was everything his penthouse wasn't. The house smelled like coffee and baby powder, with underlying notes of the lavender candles Elena had always loved. The living room was small but cozy, with a worn leather couch facing a fireplace that actually looked used. Pictures covered every surface, not the sterile professional portraits that decorated his apartment, but real moments caught in time. "Where are they?" he asked, his voice catching slightly. "Napping." Finally, Elena moved to the kitchen, which opened directly into the living room. Isabella had an ear infection last week, so sleep has been challenging. The casual mention of his daughter's illness hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been attending board meetings and reviewing quarterly reports, his child had been sick, and he hadn't even known she existed. Is she better now? Getting there. The antibiotics helped, but she's still fussy. Elena busied herself with making coffee, her movements efficient but careful, like someone who'd learned to do everything quietly. "Would you like some? It's not the fancy stuff you're probably used to, but it's strong. Please." He sat on the couch, feeling oversized and out of place among the baby bottles and soft toys. A photo on the side table caught his attention. Elena in a hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, holding two tiny babies. She looked like she'd been through battle and emerged victorious. "That was the day they were born," Elena said, following his gaze. She handed him a mug, her fingers carefully avoiding his. February 15th, 26 hours of labor, emergency C-section when Alexander's heart rate dropped. The details painted a picture of terror and triumph that he'd missed entirely. While she'd been fighting to bring their children safely into the world, he'd probably been in some sterile conference room, discussing profit margins and expansion strategies. "Were you alone?" "My sister was there." Cordelia drove down from Seattle the moment I called. Elena settled into the armchair across from him, cradling her own mug like a shield. "She's been incredible. I couldn't have done this without her." Another person who'd stepped up while he'd been absent. The guilt was becoming unbearable. "Elena, I need you to know, I never got your letters, your calls." He set down his coffee, leaning forward with desperate intensity. "My father, he controls a lot of my correspondence. If I'd known, would it have mattered?" The question was quiet, but devastating. "You'd already decided I wasn't worth fighting for." The accusation hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. He wanted to deny it, to explain about his father's manipulation and his own cowardice, but the truth was simpler and more damning. "I was afraid," he admitted, "of how much I needed you, of how completely you'd changed everything I thought I knew about myself." Elena's green eyes studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd been hurt before. And now, before he could answer, a soft crying drifted from upstairs. Elena was on her feet immediately, but Nathaniel stood too. "Can I come with you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just be quiet. If one wakes up, they both wake up, and then we're all in trouble." He followed her up the narrow staircase past walls lined with more photos. Elena's art, pictures of the twins at various stages, a few shots of a woman who looked like Elena, but with darker hair, presumably Cordelia. The nursery was small but perfectly appointed, with two cribs positioned to catch the natural light from a large window. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and Elena's artistic touch was evident in the hand-painted border of dancing animals that circled the room. Isabella was the one crying, her small face red with indignation. Elena lifted her with practiced ease, murmuring soft words that gradually calmed the infant. But Alexander had stirred too, blinking sleepily in his crib. "Can I?" Nathaniel gestured toward his son, his voice barely a whisper. Elena nodded, and Nathaniel approached the crib with the kind of caution he usually reserved for handling explosives. Alexander looked up at him with those familiar gray eyes, and something shifted in Nathaniel's chest, a tectonic movement that realigned everything he thought he knew about love. "Hello?" he whispered, extending one finger toward his son. Alexander grasped it with surprising strength, and Nathaniel felt tears he hadn't expected burning his eyes. "He's beautiful," he managed. "They both are." Elena had settled into a rocking chair with Isabella, who was now content to gnaw on her mother's finger. "They're good babies mostly. Isabella's more social. She smiles at everyone. Alexander's serious, like he's studying the world and finding it lacking. He gets that from me." "I know." The admission was soft, almost fond. Sometimes I watch him think, and it's like seeing you in miniature. They stayed like that for several minutes. The only sound, the gentle creaking of Elena's rocking chair and the occasional gurgle from the babies. Nathaniel felt something he'd never experienced before, a sense of completeness he hadn't known he'd been missing. Then Isabella started fussing again, and Elena sighed. She's hungry. I should... Of course. Nathaniel reluctantly released Alexander's hand, but his son's eyes followed him as he stepped back. As Elena began to feed Isabella, she looked up at Nathaniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you really here, Nathaniel? What do you want from us? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Nathaniel realized that his answer would determine everything that came next. Nathaniel's phone buzzed relentlessly on Elena's kitchen counter, while he sat on the living room floor attempting to change Alexander's diaper. It was his third attempt, and the baby seemed to find his father's inexperience amusing, kicking his tiny legs and gurgling with what could only be described as infant laughter. The tabs go the other way, Elena said from the couch, where she was feeding Isabella. Her voice carried a hint of amusement that made Nathaniel's chest warm in ways he'd forgotten were possible. I used to negotiate billion-dollar deals, he muttered, wrestling with the adhesive strips. How is this more complicated? Because billion-dollar deals don't pee on you mid-negotiation. As if summoned by her words, Alexander chose that moment to demonstrate exactly her point. Nathaniel jerked back, narrowly avoiding the stream, and Elena's laughter filled the room. The first genuine laugh he'd heard from her since Zurich. That's what you get for not covering him, she said, handing him a clean diaper. Rule number 1 of changing boys. Always keep them covered. The domestic scene felt surreal. 3 days ago he'd been in his sterile penthouse consumed by quarterly reports and expansion plans. Now he was sitting on a colorful rug, learning the intricacies of infant care while his phone delivered an increasingly urgent symphony of notifications. Elena's expression shifted as she watched him silence the device for the dozenth time. You should probably answer that. It's not important. Everything's important to men like you. Her voice had cooled, and he recognized the careful distance she was putting between them. That's what I learned when we were together. There was always something more pressing than us. The accusation stung because it was true. Even now, part of his mind was cataloging the missed calls, wondering what crises were brewing in his absence. But a larger part, a part that had been dormant for 18 months, was exactly where it wanted to be. Not anymore, he said, successfully fastening Alexander's diaper and feeling ridiculously proud of the accomplishment. Elena's phone rang before she could respond. She answered it one-handed, Isabella still nursing peacefully. Hey, Delia. Her expression shifted from casual to concerned in seconds. What? When? A pause. No, I can't. The twins are... Another pause. Longer this time. I understand. Yes, I'll figure something out. She hung up, her face pale. What's wrong? Nathaniel asked, lifting Alexander and marveling at how natural the movement felt. Cordelia's been in an accident. She's okay, but she's in the hospital in Seattle. Broken leg, possible concussion. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she burped Isabella. She doesn't have anyone else, and Go. I can't. The twins can't travel yet for their checkup next week, and I don't have anyone to... I'll stay with them. Elena stared at him as if he'd suggested juggling fire. You don't know anything about taking care of babies. You just taught me to change a diaper. How hard can the rest be? Nathaniel, they need to eat every 3 hours. Isabella's still fussy from her ear infection. Alexander has reflux, so he needs to be held upright after feeding or he'll... Then teach me. He stood, still holding his son, and moved to sit beside her on the couch. Write it all down. Show me everything. I'm a fast learner. This isn't a business acquisition you can master overnight. No, it's more important than that. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena searched his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Why would you do this? Because they're my children. Because you need help. Because... He paused, looking down at Alexander's sleepy face. Because this is the first time in my life I've felt like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Elena's phone buzzed with a text. She checked it and winced. Cordelia's asking for me. She's scared, and she doesn't understand what the doctors are saying. Elena looked torn between duty to her sister and responsibility to her children. I could drive up, stay overnight, come back tomorrow evening. Take as long as you need. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. Nathaniel's voice carried the same confidence he used in boardrooms. but underneath was something new, a determination born not of profit but of love. I won't let anything happen to them. Elena spent the next hour giving him a crash course in infant care. She showed him how to prepare bottles, explained the twins' different crying patterns, demonstrated the specific way Alexander needed to be held after eating. She wrote detailed instructions, created schedules, and hovered anxiously as he practiced each task. Isabella likes to be sung to when she's fussy, Elena said, zipping up her overnight bag. Anything soft. She doesn't care if you can't carry a tune. I can't carry a tune. Neither can I. She doesn't seem to mind. Elena picked up Isabella, kissing her forehead with the desperate intensity of a mother leaving her children for the first time. And Alexander. He's fascinated by the mobile above his crib. If he won't sleep, sometimes just lying him down and letting him watch it will calm him. She moved to Alexander, cradling him against her chest and whispering something Nathaniel couldn't hear. When she straightened, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. My number's on the refrigerator. Cordelia's hospital information is there too. The pediatrician's office, the pharmacy, everything you might need. Elena, he touched her arm gently. They'll be fine. Go take care of your sister. She nodded but hesitated at the door. Nathaniel, when I come back tomorrow, are you going to disappear again? The question hit him like a physical blow. She was trusting him with the most precious things in her world, but she still expected him to abandon them. The knowledge of how deeply he'd wounded her was almost unbearable. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. After she left, the house seemed smaller and larger simultaneously. The twins had fallen asleep in their bouncy seats, and Nathaniel found himself studying their faces, memorizing details he'd missed before. Isabella had Elena's delicate nose, but her chin was pure Ward's stubbornness. Alexander's ears were slightly pointed at the tips, just like Nathaniel's had been as a child. His phone rang again, and this time he recognized the number, his head of security. Sir, I need to inform you that your father has been trying to reach you. He's insistent. Let him be insistent. He's also been asking about your whereabouts. I haven't provided any information, but he's growing suspicious. Nathaniel looked at his sleeping children and felt something shift inside him, a door closing on one life while another opened before him. Good. Let him wonder. But as he hung up, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that his father's silence wouldn't last much longer, and when Victor Ward decided to act, the consequences would reach far beyond Portland. 3 a.m. came with Isabella's piercing cry echoing through the small house. Nathaniel jolted awake from where he'd dozed on the couch, his body protesting after hours of holding Alexander during an epic battle with infant reflux. The schedule Elena had left was already crumpled from constant reference, and he felt like he'd been through a war. Alexander had finally settled around midnight, only to wake again at 1:30 demanding another bottle. Now Isabella was adding her voice to the symphony of exhaustion, and Nathaniel stumbled up the stairs on legs that felt like jelly. The nursery was dim, lit only by a small nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Isabella's face was red with indignation, her tiny fists pumping the air as if she were conducting an orchestra of chaos. In the other crib, Alexander stirred but remained mercifully asleep. Hey, sweetheart, Nathaniel whispered, lifting Isabella with hands that had become surprisingly steady over the past few hours. What's wrong now? She continued crying, her small body rigid with whatever infant distress was consuming her. Nathaniel checked her diaper. Dry. He'd fed her an hour ago, so hunger seemed unlikely. That left Elena's other explanations: overtired, overstimulated, or simply needing comfort. He began the gentle bouncing motion Elena had taught him, walking slow circles around the nursery while humming tunelessly under his breath. Isabella's cries gradually shifted from outraged screams to hiccuping sobs, then to the exhausted whimpers of a baby fighting sleep. I know, he murmured against her soft hair. Everything's different, isn't it? Your mom's gone, there's this strange man holding you, and nothing feels right. As if she understood, Isabella's whimpers quieted. Her gray eyes, so like his own, blinked up at him with the kind of trust that made his chest ache. She was giving him a chance, this tiny person who carried half his DNA and all of his heart. I'm sorry I wasn't here before, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry I missed everything. Your first smiles, your first laughs, all those nights when you needed someone, and it was just your mom carrying all the weight. Isabella's eyes began to droop, but she fought it with the determination of someone who'd inherited the Ward stubbornness. Nathaniel kept walking, kept talking, pouring out 18 months of regret and wonder to a 7-month-old who listened with the gravity of a judge. I used to think love was weakness. My father taught me that feelings were liabilities, that caring too much would destroy everything I'd worked for. He paused by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street where his rental car sat like a question mark. But holding you, holding your brother, I finally understand what I've been missing. Isabella's breathing deepened, her small body finally relaxing against his chest. He stood there for another 10 minutes, afraid to move and risk waking her, content to breathe in her baby scent and marvel at the weight of responsibility and love she represented. When he finally lowered her into the crib, she stirred, but didn't wake. Alexander remained peaceful, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. Nathaniel allowed himself a moment of ridiculous pride. He'd survived his first night alone with them. Downstairs, his phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most were from his assistant, his head of security, and various board members. But the most recent call, at 2:47 a.m., was from Victor. The voicemail made his blood run cold. "Nathaniel, this little game has gone on long enough. I know where you are and I know why you're there. Come home immediately, or I'll be forced to take more direct action. The board is already asking questions about your absence. Don't make me choose between protecting you and protecting this company." The threat was clear. Victor had found him, and he was running out of patience. A soft knock at the front door made Nathaniel's stomach drop. It was nearly 4 a.m. No one made social calls at this hour. He moved to the window, peering through the curtains to see a black sedan parked behind his rental car. A man in a dark suit stood on the porch, his posture radiating the kind of professional competence that meant trouble. Nathaniel's mind raced through his options. He could ignore it, pretend to be asleep, but that would only delay the inevitable, and he wouldn't put Elena or the twins at risk by forcing a confrontation. He opened the door to find Marcus Chen, his father's head of security, a man who'd been loyal to the Ward family for 15 years and had never questioned an order. "Mr. Ward," Marcus's voice was respectful but firm, "your father sent me to escort you home. I'm not ready to leave." "I'm afraid that's not up for discussion, sir." Marcus stepped aside, revealing a second man, younger, broader, with the kind of build that suggested former military training. "Mr. Ward Sr. was very clear about the urgency of your return." Through the baby monitor clipped to his shirt, Nathaniel could hear Alexander beginning to stir. In 15 minutes, maybe 20, his son would wake demanding another bottle. Isabella would likely follow suit shortly after. Elena wouldn't be back until evening, and he'd promised to take care of them. "I can't leave right now." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. "Sir, I have my orders. I'd prefer not to make this difficult, especially with the children in the house." The implied threat hit Nathaniel like ice water. His father was willing to involve the twins to get what he wanted, to use his own grandchildren as leverage. "Give me 5 minutes to pack." "Of course, sir." Nathaniel closed the door and leaned against it, his mind spinning. He couldn't leave. Not now. Not when Elena had trusted him with the most precious things in her world. But he couldn't put the twins at risk either. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Car outside. Come quietly or we come in. Your choice." The message was followed immediately by another from Victor. "The children will be cared for. Elena can collect them when she returns. This ends now." Nathaniel stared at the messages, understanding finally crystallizing like ice in his veins. His father hadn't just found him. He'd planned this, waited until Elena was gone, until Nathaniel was alone and vulnerable, then moved with the ruthless efficiency that had built an empire. Upstairs, Alexander's cries began in earnest, soon joined by Isabella's sympathetic wails. The sound cut through Nathaniel like a blade, each cry an accusation of abandonment he couldn't bear. He had two choices: go with Marcus and leave his children to cry until strangers arrived to care for them, or refuse and risk a confrontation that could endanger everyone he'd come to love. Either way, Elena would return to find her worst fears confirmed, that Nathaniel Ward was exactly the man she'd always feared he was, someone who disappeared when things became difficult. The weight of that betrayal was almost unbearable, but as Marcus knocked again, more insistently this time, Nathaniel realized he was out of time and options. Nathaniel climbed the stairs one last time, his heart breaking with each step. The twins' cries had intensified, their synchronized wails filling the small house like an alarm he couldn't silence. In the nursery, Isabella's face was streaked with tears, her small body trembling with exhaustion and confusion. Alexander's cries were hoarse now, his voice raw from an hour of calling for comfort that wouldn't come. He lifted them both, one in each arm, and for a moment the crying stopped. Two pairs of gray eyes looked up at him with absolute trust, and Nathaniel felt something inside him shatter completely. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I promised I wouldn't leave you, and I'm breaking that promise. But if I stay, they might hurt you, and I can't. I won't let that happen." Alexander's tiny hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, as if trying to anchor him to this moment, to this choice. Isabella's eyes were drooping with exhaustion, but she fought sleep to keep watching his face. Another knock downstairs, harder this time, followed by Marcus's voice. "Mr. Ward, we really need to go." Nathaniel kissed each baby's forehead, breathing in their scent and trying to memorize the weight of them in his arms. Then he laid them gently in their cribs, his hands shaking as he covered them with soft blankets Elena had probably chosen with infinite care. "Your mom will be home soon," he promised, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. "She'll take care of you. She's better at this than I am anyway." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Elena would return to find her children crying, abandoned by the man she'd trusted despite every instinct warning her not to. She'd comfort them, feed them, sing to them until they settled, all while her heart broke a little more. He left his phone on Elena's kitchen counter along with a note he'd written with trembling hands. "Elena, I'm sorry. My father found me, and staying would have put you and the twins in danger. I couldn't risk that. There are people coming to help with Isabella and Alexander until you get home. I know this looks like abandonment, and I know you'll never forgive me for it. I don't expect you to. But please know that these 3 days have been the best of my life, and I would give anything to stay." And the black sedan felt like a hearse as it pulled away from the curb. Through the back window, Nathaniel could see the warm light spilling from Elena's house, could imagine his children's cries echoing through rooms that suddenly felt empty. Marcus sat beside him in professional silence, while his partner drove with the steady efficiency of someone completing a routine extraction. "The children will be fine," Marcus said quietly as they reached the freeway. "Your father arranged for qualified caregivers. They'll arrive within the hour." "Strangers," Nathaniel said flatly. "He's sending strangers to care for my children. Professionals. Vetted. Bonded. Experienced. They're not their mother. They're not—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "They're not me." But what right did he have to claim that role after walking away from it twice? The flight back to New York passed in a blur of private jet luxury that felt obscene after 3 days in Elena's cozy home. Nathaniel stared out the window at clouds that looked like accusations, his mind trapped in an endless loop of what-ifs and self-recrimination. By the time the plane touched down at Teterboro, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. The city looked the same, steel and glass and ambition reaching toward the sky. But Nathaniel felt like a different person returning to a life that no longer fit. Victor was waiting in the penthouse, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, a cup of coffee in his hands and satisfaction written across his features. The sight of him filled Nathaniel with a rage so pure it was almost clarifying. "You look terrible," Victor observed, settling into his usual chair. "But I suppose that's to be expected after playing house for 3 days. You sent armed men to threaten my children. I sent professionals to ensure your safe return. The children were never in any real danger, though I can't say the same about your judgment." Victor's voice carried the cool authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're lucky I acted when I did. Another day or two, and the board would have started asking questions I couldn't answer. Let them ask. Don't be naive, Nathaniel. You control 37% of Ward Enterprises stock, but the other board members combined control 41%. If they lose confidence in your leadership, they can vote you out. And then what happens to your little family?" The threat was delivered with surgical precision, designed to hit exactly where Nathaniel was most vulnerable. Without his position, without the Ward fortune, he'd have nothing to offer Elena and the twins. No way to provide for them. No leverage to protect them from whatever revenge Victor might devise. "So you see," Victor continued, "leaving wasn't just the practical choice, it was the only choice. You can't protect them if you lose everything trying to play father to children who will grow up just fine without you. They're your grandchildren. They're complications." Victor's mask slipped slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Children of a woman who was never suitable, who will raise them with middle-class values and romantic notions about love conquering all. Do you really want that for them? Do you want them to grow up believing that feelings matter more than success?" Nathaniel thought about Alexander's serious gray eyes, about Isabella's trusting grip on his finger, about the way Elena hummed while she fed them, turning even the most mundane moments into something precious. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Victor's expression hardened. "Then you're more of a fool than I thought. But it doesn't matter now. You're here, the crisis is over, and we can return to business as usual. In time you'll thank me for saving you from yourself. Will I? Of course. Because deep down, you know I'm right. You know that what you were feeling wasn't love. It was guilt, obligation, some misguided notion of responsibility for a mistake you made years ago." Victor stood, smoothing his tie with casual arrogance. "Real love doesn't abandon ship the moment things become difficult. And you, my son, have just proven that whatever you felt for that woman and those children wasn't strong enough to overcome your fundamental nature." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound and weaken. But beneath the pain, Nathaniel felt something else stirring, a quiet certainty that had been building since the moment he'd first held his children. His father was wrong. About love, about strength, about what mattered in life. The only question now was whether Nathaniel had the courage to prove it. As Victor headed toward the elevator, his parting words carried the weight of prophecy and threat. "The quarterly board meeting is Thursday. I trust you'll be ready to focus on what's actually important." But alone in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly hollow, Nathaniel realized that for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what was actually important, and it wasn't in this building. Helena's hand shook as she pulled into her driveway at 7:30 that evening, 18 hours after she'd left for Seattle. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the sage-green paint, but something felt wrong. The house looked the same, but her mother's instincts were screaming danger. She'd tried calling Nathaniel 6 times during the drive from Seattle, each call going straight to voicemail. When she'd finally called her own house phone, a woman with a crisp, professional voice had answered. "Marsh residence. This is Claire speaking." Claire turned out to be a nanny in her 50s, hired by Mr. Ward's people to care for the twins until Elena returned. She was competent, kind even, but she was a stranger holding Elena's babies, and that fact made Elena's blood burn with a fury she'd never experienced. "Where's Nathaniel?" Elena demanded the moment she walked through her own front door. Claire, a woman with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades caring for other people's children, looked genuinely confused. "I was told the father had to return to New York on urgent business. He left very detailed care instructions and seemed quite distressed about having to leave." Elena found his note on the kitchen counter. The paper slightly crumpled as if he'd written it several times. She read it twice, her heart breaking and raging in equal measure. Danger. He'd mentioned danger, as if that somehow justified breaking the promise he'd made less than 24 hours earlier. "How long have you been here?" Elena asked, taking Isabella from Claire's arms and breathing in her daughter's familiar scent. "Since about 5 this morning. The babies were quite upset when I arrived. They'd been crying for some time. It took several hours to get them settled." 5 hours. Her children had been crying alone for 5 hours before help arrived. Elena closed her eyes, imagining their confusion and fear, their tiny voices calling for comfort that didn't come. "Thank you for taking care of them," Elena managed, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "But I can handle things from here." After Claire left, Elena sat in the rocking chair and held both twins, tears streaming down her face as she whispered apologies they couldn't understand. They were clean, fed, obviously well cared for in a technical sense, but she could feel their confusion in the way they clung to her, in the extra fussiness that spoke of disrupted routines and broken trust. "Mama's here," she murmured against Isabella's soft hair. "I'm so sorry. I should never have left you with him." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely fair. The man who'd learned to change diapers with such earnest concentration, who'd held Alexander upright for hours to help with his reflux, who'd whispered confessions and promises in the nursery, that man hadn't wanted to leave. The note made that clear. The question was, who was the real Nathaniel Ward? The man who'd fought his inexperience to care for his children, or the one who disappeared the moment his father called? 3 days passed in a blur of routine and heartbreak. Elena threw herself into caring for the twins, but every small milestone felt hollow. Isabella's first successful attempt at sitting up unassisted, Alexander's delighted giggle when she played peekaboo. Moments that should have been pure joy were tainted by the absence of someone who should have been there to witness them. On the 4th day, Cordelia arrived from Seattle, still moving carefully on her new crutches but determined to help. "You look like hell," her sister announced, settling into the kitchen chair with the bluntness that had always characterized their relationship. "Thanks. You look pretty rough yourself." Cordelia's leg was in a walking cast, and she had a fading bruise along her left temple, but her eyes were clear and concerned. "Tell me what happened. All you said on the phone was that Nathaniel had to leave suddenly." Elena found herself recounting the entire story, from the airport encounter to those 3 precious days when she'd almost believed in second chances, to waking up to find her children in the care of a stranger, and the man she'd trusted gone without explanation. "He just left?" Cordelia's voice carried the protective anger of someone who'd watched her sister's heart break once before. "After you trusted him with Isabella and Alexander? His note said there was danger. That staying would have put us at risk. What kind of danger could possibly—" Cordelia stopped, her expression shifting. "His father." Elena nodded. She'd told Cordelia about Victor Ward during the worst days after their breakup, about his cold disapproval and the way he'd slowly poisoned Nathaniel against their relationship. So, he chose Daddy's approval over his own children. "I don't think it was that simple, wasn't it?" Cordelia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Elena, I love you, but you have a terrible habit of making excuses for people who hurt you. He made you a promise, and he broke it. Whatever his reasons, the result is the same." Elena wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat, because Cordelia was right, at least partially. Whatever pressures Nathaniel had faced, whatever threats his father had made, the end result was 2 confused babies and a woman who'd foolishly allowed herself to hope. "What are you going to do if he comes back?" Cordelia asked. "He won't. But if he does?" Elena looked out the kitchen window at the garden she'd planted when she'd first moved to Portland, when she'd been pregnant and scared and determined to build a life for her children. She'd done it once without him, created a home, established routines, found work that mattered. She could do it again. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to slam the door in his face, but another part—" She paused, remembering the way he'd looked at Alexander, the gentle reverence in his voice when he'd whispered to Isabella in the nursery. Another part remembers how he was with them, how natural it seemed once he got past the fear. People don't change overnight, Elena, especially not people like him. Maybe not, but what if they do? What if love really can transform someone? Cordelia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then you'll have to decide if the risk is worth it. But this time, don't just think about what you want. Think about what Isabella and Alexander need. They deserve stability, consistency, parents who won't disappear when things get complicated." That evening, after Cordelia had gone to bed and the twins were finally asleep, Elena sat in the living room with a cup of tea and tried to imagine her future. She could see herself raising the children alone, supporting them through school and heartbreak and all the challenges that lay ahead. It would be hard, but she was strong enough. What she couldn't see was how to protect her heart if Nathaniel came back, how to trust someone who'd already proven that his father's voice carried more weight than his children's cries. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Elena, it's Nathaniel. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that leaving wasn't my choice. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fight for them, for us. I just need time." Elena stared at the message for a long time, her heart warring between hope and self-preservation. Finally, she deleted it without responding. If Nathaniel Ward wanted to fight for his family, he'd have to prove it with more than words. The Ward Enterprises boardroom had never felt more like a battlefield. Nathaniel sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his suit immaculate, but his eyes hollow from 3 weeks of sleepless nights. Around him, 12 board members reviewed quarterly reports with the enthusiasm of vultures circling wounded prey. "The Geneva acquisition has stalled," announced Rebecca Sterling, the sharp-eyed CFO, who'd never liked Nathaniel's unconventional approaches. "Our partners are questioning the leadership stability of Ward Enterprises." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Nathaniel had missed 4 key meetings, delayed 3 major decisions, and his usually razor-sharp focus had been replaced by something his colleagues couldn't quite identify, but didn't trust. "Perhaps," Victor interjected from his position at Nathaniel's right hand, "it's time to discuss succession planning. The company needs leadership that's fully committed to its growth." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Nathaniel felt the shift in the room's atmosphere, the way power dynamics realigned in real time. His father was making his move, using Nathaniel's distraction to position himself as the stable alternative. "I'm fully committed," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Are you?" This from James Morrison, the lead investor who'd backed Nathaniel's expansion into European markets. Because, frankly, your performance these past weeks suggests otherwise. Nathaniel's phone, set to silent, lit up with a notification. Elena's sister's name flashed on the screen, Cordelia Marsh. His heart stopped. The only reason Elena's sister would contact him was if something had happened to the twins. "Excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. "Nathaniel," Victor's voice carried a warning. "We're in the middle of— I have to take this." He stepped out of the boardroom, his hands shaking as he answered the call. "This is Nathaniel." "Mr. Ward, this is Cordelia Marsh, Elena's sister." Her voice was tense, controlled. "I'm calling because Alexander is in the hospital." The world tilted. "What happened?" "High fever, difficulty breathing. They think it might be pneumonia." "Elena's with him now, but—" Cordelia paused, and he could hear the weight of a difficult decision. "She doesn't know I'm calling you, but I thought, as his father, you should know." "Which hospital?" "OSU, Pediatric ICU." "But before you—" Nathaniel was already moving toward the elevator, his mind racing past protocol and consequences. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Mr. Ward, you should know that Elena is barely holding it together. If you come here and then leave again—" "I won't leave." The promise came out raw, absolute. "Not this time." Behind him, the boardroom erupted in heated discussion. He could hear Victor's voice rising above the others, no doubt explaining his son's latest breakdown in leadership judgment. In 6 hours, maybe less, Nathaniel's position at Ward Enterprises would be voted away. Everything his family had built for 3 generations would be lost. He didn't care. The flight to Portland felt endless. Nathaniel had chartered the fastest jet available, but physics didn't bend to desperation, and every minute stretched like an eternity. He thought about Alexander's serious gray eyes, about the way his son had gripped his finger with surprising strength. The idea of that tiny body fighting for breath was unbearable. His phone buzzed constantly. Victor, the board members, his assistant, all demanding explanations he couldn't give. Finally, he turned it off and stared out at clouds that looked like accusations. The pediatric ICU at OHSU was a controlled chaos of beeping machines, hushed conversations, and the kind of sterile efficiency that made miracles routine. Nathaniel found Elena in the family waiting area, curled in an uncomfortable chair with Isabella sleeping in her arms. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by fear and exhaustion. "Elena." She looked up, and he saw the moment recognition hit. Surprise, followed quickly by anger, then something more complicated that might have been relief. "How did you, Cordelia?" Elena's voice was hoarse from crying. "She called you. How is he?" "Stable. The antibiotics are working, but—" She swallowed hard, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "He's so small in that hospital bed, all those machines, and he just looks lost." Nathaniel sat beside her, careful not to intrude on her space, but close enough to offer whatever comfort she might accept. "Can I see him?" "Immediate family only." "And you—" Elena stopped, her expression crumbling. "I don't know what you are anymore, Nathaniel. You left. When I trusted you, when they needed you, you just left. I know, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't explain why my son is lying in a hospital bed while his father plays businessman in New York." The accusation hit like a physical blow, made worse by its essential truth. While he'd been sitting in boardrooms and managing his father's manipulations, his children had been living their lives without him, getting sick, reaching milestones, needing their father, and finding only absence. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed them. I failed you. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. You said that before. This time is different." Elena studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "What's different about it?" "Because this time I'm choosing them over everything else. Over the company, over my father's approval, over the life I thought I wanted." He pulled out his phone, showing her the dozens of missed calls and messages. "My board is voting me out as we speak. By tomorrow, I'll have lost everything I spent my life building. And you think that makes it better? That you'll sacrifice your career for us? No, I think it makes it real. I think it proves that what I feel for you, for Isabella and Alexander, isn't guilt or obligation or some misguided sense of duty. It's love, the kind that changes everything." Elena's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched Isabella closer. "I can't do this again, Nathaniel. I can't let myself believe in you just to watch you disappear when things get hard. Then don't believe in me yet. Let me prove it." Before Elena could respond, a nurse appeared at their side. "Mrs. Marsh, Alexander is asking for you." Well, not asking exactly, but he's more settled when he hears your voice. Elena stood carefully, passing Isabella to Cordelia, who had appeared with coffee and the kind of protective energy that suggested she'd been watching their interaction closely. "Can his father come too?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse looked between them, taking in the obvious tension and heartbreak. "Of course, but only for a few minutes." As they walked down the sterile corridor toward the pediatric ICU, Elena spoke without looking at him. "If you hurt him, if you hurt any of us again, I will make sure you never get another chance." Nathaniel understood that she wasn't just talking about visiting rights or custody arrangements. She was offering him one final opportunity to prove himself worthy of the family he'd never deserved, but desperately needed. "I understand." The ICU room was small and filled with the quiet symphony of medical equipment. Alexander lay in a bed that dwarfed his 7-month-old frame, oxygen tubes in his nose and monitors tracking every vital sign. But when Nathaniel approached, his son's eyes opened, unfocused but aware, searching. "Hey, buddy," Nathaniel whispered, his voice breaking. "Daddy's here." Alexander's tiny hand moved slightly, and Nathaniel gently covered it with his own finger. The grip that had once seemed impossibly strong now felt fragile, precious, breakable. "I'm not going anywhere this time," he promised, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Whatever happens, wherever this goes, I'm staying right here." And for the first time in 3 weeks, Nathaniel Ward knew exactly where he belonged. 72 hours later, Alexander's fever broke just as the Oregon sun painted the hospital room in shades of gold and amber. Nathaniel had barely left the ICU, surviving on vending machine coffee and the kind of adrenaline that comes from watching your child fight for every breath. His expensive suit had been replaced by scrubs a sympathetic nurse had found, and stubble shadowed his jaw, but his eyes remained fixed on his son with unwavering intensity. Elena sat beside Alexander's bed, reading Where the Wild Things Are in a voice hoarse from 3 days of stories, songs, and whispered prayers. Isabella slept peacefully in her carrier, finally settled after being fussy from the disrupted routine and her mother's stress. "His oxygen levels are back to normal," Dr. Patricia Collins announced as she reviewed Alexander's chart. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the steady presence of someone who'd guided countless families through their worst fears. "The pneumonia is responding beautifully to treatment. If he continues improving at this rate, he should be able to go home tomorrow." Elena's sob of relief seemed to echo off the sterile walls. Nathaniel felt his own eyes burn with tears he'd been holding back since Cordelia's phone call. Alexander looked at both his parents with those serious gray eyes, as if he understood the weight of what they'd all survived together. "Thank you," Elena whispered to the doctor, her voice thick with emotion. After Dr. Collins left, the room settled into the kind of peaceful silence that follows a storm. Alexander's breathing was easy now, no longer the labored struggle that had terrified them all. His tiny fingers wrapped around Nathaniel's thumb with renewed strength, and for the first time in days, Nathaniel allowed himself to believe they'd made it through. "You haven't left," Elena observed quietly. It wasn't a question, but there was wonder in her voice as if she still couldn't quite believe it. "I told you I wouldn't. Even when your phone kept buzzing. Even when that woman from your office showed up yesterday demanding you sign papers." Nathaniel's assistant had indeed arrived with emergency documents, her expression tight with barely controlled panic about the board's decision to remove him as CEO. He'd signed his resignation letter without reading it, his attention never leaving Alexander's bedside. "None of that matters." Elena turned to study his face, searching for something she seemed afraid to find. "What happens now? When we leave here, when the crisis is over, what happens to your grand gesture?" It wasn't a gesture. Nathaniel shifted carefully, mindful of the wires and tubes still monitoring his son. "Elena, I spent 37 years believing that love was weakness, that caring too much would destroy everything I'd worked for. My father taught me that success was the only thing that mattered, that feelings were liabilities to be managed." He paused, looking down at Alexander's peaceful face, but holding him, watching him fight. "I finally understand what real strength looks like. It's not controlling a boardroom or closing billion-dollar deals. It's being here when your child needs you, even if it costs you everything else. And your company? Gone. Victor orchestrated a perfect coup while I was here. He's probably already planning the press release about my temporary leave of absence turning permanent." Nathaniel found he could speak about it without the devastating loss he'd expected to feel. "I'll get severance, some investment income. It won't be the Ward fortune, but it'll be enough to provide for you and the twins while I figure out what comes next." Elena's expression softened, but wariness remained in her green eyes. "What do you want to come next?" "I want to learn how to be a father. I want to be here for Alexander's first steps, for Isabella's first words. I want to help with 2 a.m. feedings and diaper changes and all the ordinary moments I've already missed." He met her gaze directly, letting her see the vulnerability he'd spent a lifetime hiding. "And I want the chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard." "Nathaniel, I know I don't deserve it. I know I've already broken your trust twice, and asking for a third chance is asking too much. But I'm going to ask anyway because losing you and the twins taught me what really matters in life." Before Elena could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of expensive shoes on linoleum, and then Victor Ward appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud in a tailored suit. "This has gone far enough," Victor announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Nathaniel, you're coming home. Now." "I am home." Victor's gaze swept the hospital room with obvious disdain. The medical equipment, Elena's rumpled clothes, the baby carrier holding his granddaughter. "This is not home. This is some romantic fantasy that's already cost you everything rational people work their entire lives to achieve. I didn't lose anything that mattered. You lost Ward Enterprises." Victor's composure cracked slightly, revealing the fury beneath his polished exterior. 3 generations of building, 60 years of my life's work, and you threw it away for what? A woman who trapped you with children. Those children are your grandchildren. They're mistakes that don't need to define the rest of your life." Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone that had shaped Nathaniel's childhood. "It's not too late. I can convince the board to reverse their decision if you come home now. If you commit to putting the company first." Elena stood slowly, her exhaustion replaced by something fierce and protective. "Get out." Victor barely glanced at her. "You don't belong in this conversation. This is my son's hospital room. This is my family, and you're not welcome here." "Your family?" Victor's laugh was cold, calculated to wound. "You think this is sustainable? You think he'll be content playing house when the novelty wears off? When he realizes what he's given up, how far he's fallen?" "I said get out." Elena's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from protecting what matters most. "Security is one call away, and I promise you they'll side with the mother whose child is recovering from pneumonia over the man disrupting a pediatric ICU." For a moment, Victor looked genuinely surprised. He was used to intimidating people, used to his wealth and presence commanding automatic deference. But Elena stared him down with the fearless intensity of a mother defending her cubs. "This isn't over," Victor said, his gaze shifting to Nathaniel. "When reality sets in, when you remember who you really are, I won't be so forgiving." After he left, the room felt lighter, as if his toxic presence had been physically removed from the air they breathed. Nathaniel looked at Elena with something approaching awe. "You stood up to him. Someone had to." Elena settled back into her chair, reaching out to smooth Alexander's hair. "He can't keep controlling your life if you don't let him." "I'm not going to let him." Nathaniel's voice carried a certainty that surprised them both. "I'm done being the son he wanted me to be. I want to be the father they need me to be." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching Alexander sleep and Isabella stir in her carrier. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "If we try this, if we try to be a family, it has to be real. Not because you feel guilty, not because you want to prove something to your father, but because you genuinely want this life, because you choose us every day, not just during the dramatic moments. I choose you, all of you, every day, in every way that matters." Elena reached out slowly, her fingers intertwining with his. "Then let's go home." As the Portland sun set outside the hospital windows, painting the room in shades of hope and possibility, Nathaniel Ward held his son's hand and his love's trust, and knew that he'd finally found everything he'd been searching for, without realizing it. 2 years later, the Portland Community Arts Center buzzed with the gentle chaos of children's laughter and parents' conversations as Elena adjusted the final painting in her latest exhibition. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating watercolor portraits of trauma survivors, whose healing journeys had been captured in bold strokes of color and hope. Her art therapy program had grown from 3 days a week to a full-time position, and the center had become a sanctuary for dozens of families rebuilding their lives. "Mama, look!" Isabella's voice rang out as she toddled toward Elena with the unsteady determination of a 2.5-year-old. Her dark curls bounced with each step, and her gray eyes, so like her father's, sparkled with mischief. In her chubby hands, she clutched a finger painting that was mostly purple with enthusiastic splashes of yellow. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Elena said, crouching down to examine the masterpiece with appropriate reverence. "Tell me about all these colors." "It's Daddy cooking," Isabella announced proudly, pointing to what might have been stick figures if viewed with sufficient imagination. Elena laughed, remembering yesterday's kitchen disaster when Nathaniel had attempted to make pancakes and somehow managed to get batter on the ceiling. "Daddy's getting better at cooking, isn't he?" "A little better," came Nathaniel's voice from behind them, warm with amusement. He approached, carrying Alexander, who at 2.5 was quieter than his sister, but possessed an intensity that suggested deep thoughts constantly brewing behind his serious expression. "Though I maintain the ceiling incident was a learning experience. Daddy made purple pancakes," Alexander informed his mother solemnly, as if this were a matter of great importance. "They were supposed to be blueberry," Nathaniel clarified, shifting Alexander to his hip with practiced ease. 2 years of hands-on fatherhood had transformed him from a man who'd been afraid to hold his own children to someone who could manage diaper changes, tantrums, and bedtime stories with equal competence. The past 24 months had been a masterclass in reinvention. After losing Ward Enterprises, Nathaniel had used his severance and investment income to start a consulting firm specializing in helping family businesses navigate succession planning. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that his expertise in dysfunctional family dynamics had become his greatest professional asset. The work was fulfilling in ways his old position had never been, but more importantly, it allowed him the flexibility to be present for the twins' lives. He'd been there for Alexander's first words, "Da-da," whispered during a particularly challenging night when the toddler had refused to sleep for anyone else. He'd witnessed Isabella's first independent steps, taken in their backyard while chasing a butterfly. He'd survived the terrible twos with both children, learned to navigate toddler negotiations, and discovered that building a blanket fort required skills no MBA program had ever taught. "How does the exhibition look?" Nathaniel asked, surveying the room with pride. Elena's work had gained recognition throughout the Pacific Northwest, and this particular showcase featured paintings by both Elena and her clients, a collaborative celebration of healing through art. "Perfect," Elena replied, though she was looking at her family rather than the paintings. "Cordelia should be here soon with the refreshments." As if summoned by her name, Cordelia appeared carrying boxes of pastries from their favorite local bakery. Her leg had healed completely from the accident 2 years ago, and she'd recently moved to Portland permanently to be closer to her sister and the twins. The extra support had been invaluable, especially during the challenging early months when Elena and Nathaniel were rebuilding trust while learning to co-parent. "Uncle Delia!" Isabella shrieked with delight, using the name she'd given Cordelia before mastering the difference between uncle and aunt. "Hey there, Munchkin," Cordelia said, setting down the bakery boxes to accept Isabella's enthusiastic hug. "And hello to you too, serious man," she added to Alexander, who studied her with his characteristic intensity before granting her a smile. The relationship between Cordelia and Nathaniel had taken time to develop. She'd been protective of Elena, skeptical of his transformation, and unwilling to pretend otherwise for the sake of politeness. But gradually, through consistent presence and demonstrated commitment to his family, Nathaniel had earned her grudging respect and eventually genuine affection. "Any word from Victor?" Cordelia asked quietly, while the twins were distracted by the pastries. Nathaniel's expression tightened slightly. His father had made several attempts to re-establish contact over the past 2 years, alternating between manipulation, guilt, and outright bribery. The latest had been a letter suggesting that the twins deserved their proper inheritance and should spend summers at the Ward estate to learn about their family legacy. "I spoke to him last week," Nathaniel admitted. "He's still convinced this is all a phase that I'll eventually outgrow. He can't comprehend that I'm actually happier than I've ever been." Elena reached for his hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months of rebuilding their relationship. They'd attended couples therapy, worked through the trauma of his abandonment, and slowly reconstructed trust on a foundation of consistent actions rather than promises. "Do you think he'll ever accept it?" Elena asked. "I don't think acceptance is in his vocabulary, but it doesn't matter anymore. His opinion stopped having power over my life the day I chose to stay in that hospital room." The twins had discovered the art supplies Elena kept available for young visitors, and Isabella was now enthusiastically finger painting, while Alexander observed with scientific interest. Their personalities had become more distinct over the past year. Isabella was gregarious, creative, and utterly fearless, while Alexander was thoughtful, deliberate, and possessed in vocabulary that often surprised adults. "They're so different," Elena mused, watching her children with the contentment of someone who'd found peace in chaos. "Isabella gets her adventurous spirit from you," Nathaniel said, wrapping his arms around Elena from behind. "Alexander gets his analytical mind from both of us, I think." "What do they get from you?" Nathaniel considered this seriously. "Stubbornness, unfortunately, and hopefully, the ability to recognize what's truly important in life, even if it takes them slightly less time than it took me." As the afternoon progressed, friends and colleagues arrived to view Elena's exhibition. The paintings told stories of transformation: abuse survivors who'd found their voices through color, veterans processing trauma through abstract expression, children rebuilding trust through collaborative art projects. Elena moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, discussing her work with the passion of someone who'd found their calling. Nathaniel found himself standing before a particular painting that always moved him, a portrait Elena had done of him during those early weeks when they were rebuilding their relationship. In it, he was holding both twins, but his face was turned toward the light streaming through a window. The expression she'd captured was one of wonder, as if he were seeing himself clearly for the first time. "That one's my favorite," Elena said, appearing at his side. "Why?" "Because it's the moment I realized you'd really changed. Not just decided to change, but actually transformed into someone new." She paused, studying the painting with the critical eye of an artist. "I painted it the day Alexander took his first steps. You were so focused on encouraging him, so completely present in that moment that I knew we were going to be okay, even after everything I'd put you through, especially after everything. Because love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do when you realize you've made them. It's about choosing to grow instead of defending who you used to be." As evening approached and the exhibition wound down, they gathered their supplies and prepared to head home. Isabella had fallen asleep in Nathaniel's arms, paint still decorating her fingers and cheek, while Alexander held Elena's hand and provided a detailed commentary on everything they passed. Their house, Elena's house, which had become theirs through slow, deliberate integration, welcomed them with the warm chaos of family life. Toys scattered across the living room, artwork covering the refrigerator, and the comfortable disorder that comes from prioritizing connection over perfection. After the twins were bathed and settled into their beds, Elena and Nathaniel sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the Portland sky fade from gold to purple. The garden Elena had planted during her pregnancy had matured into something spectacular, with climbing roses and lavender creating a fragrance that had become synonymous with home. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked. "The power, the prestige, the certainty of who you were?" Nathaniel considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked difficult things. "I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. When your worth is measured in profit margins and market share, you always know where you stand. This is messier, more complicated. But I've never been happier. I've never felt more like myself than I do when Isabella insists I'm the only one who can read her bedtime story correctly, or when Alexander climbs into my lap just because he wants to be close to someone he trusts." Nathaniel paused, reaching for Elena's hand. "And I've never loved anyone the way I love you, not despite the challenges, but because of how we've met them together." Elena leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of someone who'd proven himself through actions rather than words. "I love you too, the real you, not the version you thought you had to be." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear over Portland's skyline, Nathaniel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 2 years ago, he'd been a man terrified of his own capacity for love, controlled by his father's vision of success and trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt hollow within. Now he was someone's father, someone's partner, someone's choice made daily rather than once. He coached Isabella through toddler meltdowns, helped Alexander build elaborate block towers, and felt his heart expand every time one of them reached for him with automatic trust. The future stretched ahead with all its uncertainties: school years and teenage rebellion, career decisions and relationship challenges. But for the first time in his life, Nathaniel faced that uncertainty with excitement rather than fear, knowing that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "Just this. All of it. How completely my definition of success has changed." And what does success look like now? Nathaniel smiled, thinking of purple pancakes and finger paintings of 2-year-old philosophy and 3 a.m. lullabies. It looks like coming home to people who are genuinely happy to see you. It looks like being trusted with someone's heart and proving yourself worthy of that trust. It looks like building something that matters more than money or power or public recognition. Elena tilted her face up to meet his gaze. It looks like love. It looks like love, he agreed. Inside the house, a soft cry drifted from upstairs. Isabella, probably, having a dream that required parental comfort. Elena started to rise, but Nathaniel touched her arm gently. "I'll go," he said, kissing her forehead. "Daddy duty calls." As he climbed the stairs toward his daughter's voice, Nathaniel Ward reflected on how profoundly his life had changed since that cold afternoon in a Zurich airport lounge. He'd lost an empire but gained a kingdom. He'd sacrificed his father's approval but earned his children's love. He'd given up control but found freedom. And in the nursery that had once seemed foreign and intimidating, surrounded by the gentle chaos of family life, he finally understood what his grandfather might have meant when he'd spoken about legacy. It wasn't about buildings or bank accounts or business empires that could be lost in a single board meeting. True legacy lived in the trust of a child who reached for you in the darkness, in the love of a partner who chose to believe in your capacity for growth, in the daily decision to be present for the moments that mattered most. As Isabella settled back into sleep with her father's quiet song filling the room, Nathaniel knew he'd finally built something that would last. Would you have made the same choice? Giving up everything you'd worked for to fight for the family you'd almost lost? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.